And finally this week, as the clock ticks inexorably towards the shutdown of the United States government, we've had a habit in the last 2 weeks of sharing with you what we consider to be some of the best political adverts. Now, both of the previous ones have been from the United States. We thought this one from Australia, attacking Rupert Murdoch, the not-so-favorite son who used to be calling that particular country home. His meddling in their governmental affairs and their parliamentary election was not appreciated at all.
It was great when you could pick up the paper and get, well, news. Recently, the Courier Mail and the Daily Telly have been using their front pages to run a political campaign instead. Their owner, US billionaire Rupert Murdoch, has an agenda to get rid of our current PM. Fair enough. We all have an opinion. But political bias presented as news is, well, misleading crap. Don't let the crap decide your vote. Stand up for what you want. Tell Rupert we'll choose our own government.
Well, as you can see, not too many people, even Australia, appreciate Rupert Murdoch and his efforts, so it's nice to know you're a universal pariah, Rupert. Now, before we go, we're going to share with you one last segment. That's with Rachel Maddow. She works for the cable broadcasting network MSNBC in the United States, and she has a very good ability to break things down into their component parts and explain all of the lunacy behind the pending U.S. government shutdown. I think you'll agree with me. She does this better than anybody else.
I should say, not just happy Friday, but happy, crazy, your government is shutting down and turning out the lights Friday. Woohoo! The domestic news, of course, is dominated by our own Congress wantonly shutting down our own government for no externally imposed reason at all, just because one side has decided they maybe want to use this tactic to try to get what they want that they can't get through other, more normal diplomatic means. With 800,000 or so workers temporarily not working, crucial government functions, if not stopping altogether, then at least powering down to a very significant extent. The essential stuff, like air traffic control and sending out Social Security checks and so on, that stuff will get done. But defining what's essential isn't all that easy. In Colorado right now, they are, of course, cleaning up from devastating floods that killed 8 people and swept away homes and washed out hundreds of miles of roads. As part of its recovery, Colorado's been getting help from all over the place. For example, the Utah National Guard was planning to send 120 engineers to help rebuild a stretch of US 36 north of Boulder, Colorado. Colorado's been racing to rebuild its roads before the winter sets in, focusing on the most crucial arteries first. Well, now, as part of us all getting ready for a big government shutdown, more than half of the Utah National Guard engineers who'd been on their way to help in Colorado, they've been told to stand down. The Colorado National Guardsmen, already working on the recovery, are also now waiting to hear if they too are going to get pulled off the job and sent home in the middle of Colorado trying to recover from those floods, with the clock ticking to the first snows. We are starting to see what the shutdown would look like, what the cost of it will be, both in the states and in Washington, and what the knock-on effects might be in the economy at large. But there's another way of looking at this, about looking at why this is happening. One of the things we're not getting done in Washington, because we are having this self-imposed shutdown fight, is that we are not getting anything else done in Washington. And that, of course, is something that preceded this crisis, the whole thing about not getting anything done. I mean, Republicans had a transportation and housing bill. They could not vote to pass their own transportation and housing bill. They had a bill to keep the government going, so we would not be facing this imminent shutdown. They could not pass could not vote to pass their own bill to keep the government going. They had a bill called the Farm Bill that's always used in jokes in Washington about what's the bare minimum thing you ought to be able to do even if you can do nothing else. This is supposed to be the easy one, the least controversial thing ever, right? And they wrote themselves one, but they could not get the votes to pass it, even their own bill, not even in their own caucus. Back during the run-up to the presidential election, you might remember a little kerfuffle about this bill because one of the candidates, Michelle Bachmann, was revealed to be a big corporate welfare recipient. Michelle Bachmann is always railing about the size of government and how government has to do less. But her family, it turned out, had taken over $250,000 in federal subsidies just a check from the government because they have a family farm. So it was this awkward sort of hypocrisy for Michelle Bachmann as a conservative presidential candidate that she was willing to take federal money through the Farm Bill as payment from the government for her family having a farm, but she simultaneously wanted to cut money from the same bill for other Americans who get money from that bill. Not because they have a farm, but because they have this problem. They need to eat. Cut food stamps for other people, keep farm subsidies for myself and my family. It's a particularly obnoxious form of political hypocrisy. And it's not just Michelle Bachmann. Even if you just look at members of Congress who are getting these kinds of subsidies for themselves, not even for their family members, just for themselves, there's a whole bunch of them. But just looking at the ones who get these subsidies for themselves, look at Congressman Tom Latham of Iowa. Mr. Latham used to be the co-owner of the Latham Seed Company and a couple of farms that had his name on them. So back home, he was taking farm subsidies by the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of dollars from the federal government. But in D.C., in Congress, Mr. Latham voted to cut food subsidies from the same bill for people who need to eat. Martha Roby, Congresswoman from Alabama. She owns a farm in Montgomery County, Alabama. Back home, Ms. Roby has been getting checks from the federal government for her farm. Thank you very much. But in Congress, she voted to keep the farm aid going to herself, but to cut the money for people who need help getting something to eat. Same bill. Wants specifically to keep the money that goes to her, but to cut the money that goes to anybody else in the same bill. Call me a liberal, you do anyway, but how can you vote that your family should be able to continue to be given federal money through this specific bill, but you cannot abide other Americans, poor Americans, getting money from the same bill so they can eat? How can you take it for yourself and move to block it for somebody else? Apparently, it is not that hard to do something like that because we see it over and over and over again, and it's part of what's going on right now in Washington. I mean, hypocrisy is obviously not a new phenomenon in Washington. Washington didn't even invent it. What you do in Congress may seem like it's theory or it's ideological expression or it's just something that people get to talk about on cable news and then you clip up little pieces of cable news and turn it into attack ads. But your actions have consequences when you are a member of Congress. And hypocrisy, in its miserable, cold little heart, is a lack of empathy. We think of it as saying one thing and doing the opposite. But it comes from a lack of feeling for anyone who is not you yourself. It comes from voting to make other people go hungry while you quietly cash your government check from the same program. It means voting down disaster relief for anybody else right before you insist that the federal government open the taps and send the disaster relief dollars to you. Because you can't imagine the problems that other people are having, but the problems that you're having, those you feel. It means throwing the country into economic, governmental, everyday living chaos because you didn't get your way. And because you do not care how it affects ordinary Americans or America until it affects you.
Well, that's Worldview Show for the week of the 23rd of September 2013. We enjoy bringing this to you. We hope you've enjoyed watching it. Now, here's some ways in which you can keep in touch with us. You can follow us on Twitter at Worldview Show and Facebook.com/Worldview Show. And you can watch clips of our show anytime on demand at YouTube.com/Worldview Show. We'd love to hear from you. Our email address is worldviewshow@gmail.com. The banner and logos that we use in the show were created by Peter Barry Ertiel. You can reach him at www.peterbertiel.com. The voiceover on the podcast and taking us into and out of breaks is done by Gerald Price. You can find his work at geraldprice.co.uk. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.